Hi, I'm Mark Skoultchi, Managing Director of Catchword, New York. In this how-to video, I'm going to answer a few of the most common questions that people have about naming firms, including who should hire a naming firm and what makes one agency better than another. Also, what does a typical naming process involve, and how long does it take professionals to actually develop a brand name? So let's get started. First question, who should hire a naming firm? Well, first, it's important to mention that the cost of naming services, they're not cheap, and not everyone can afford to work with a professional naming agency. The firms that benefit most usually have a large customer base, and they can afford to heavily market their brand names. They can be large multinational companies in need of names that work on a global scale, like Coca-Cola or McDonald's, or medium-sized organizations simply looking to distinguish their products and services in a crowded competitive set. Some have multiple target audiences and need a name that has broad appeal, and others may simply be looking for an exact domain name. Pretty much anyone who believes their company or organization isn't getting the degree of attention or market share that it deserves should consider hiring a naming firm. But they should understand that this kind of branding help just doesn't come cheap. Assuming you've made a decision to hire a naming firm, what exactly should you be looking for in a potential partner? Well, for starters, you'll want to look at their portfolio of work. Not necessarily for the most recognizable brand names. It's not actually the best indicator of a company's naming abilities, but to the creative depth and range, stylistic flair. You should admire the name ideas they've come up with, even if you don't recognize the brands. And the portfolio, it should be diverse and extensive. They should have broad client experience, including working in many different sectors, and they should have a rich history of name development, been around the block, so to speak, and be dedicated to naming as a branding discipline. They should have a rigorous process that's been fine-tuned through years of actual use, and be able to talk in depth and convincingly about their process, including their legal and linguistic screening capabilities. And ideally, they should have a team that's been in place and worked together as naming professionals for years. Naming is a really collaborative exercise, and timelines on projects can be really short. A tight-knit team with experience working together will be much more effective than an ever-changing and disconnected group of individuals. So, what can you expect in terms of timeline and process? Well, of course, every naming firm is different, but most firms will expect a 6-week commitment of your time to complete the project. And that schedule can be a little shorter or a little longer depending on the scope of the project, but 6 weeks is a pretty good benchmark. Naturally, processes always differ from firm to firm, but there are some commonalities. In general, you should expect to educate your partner on the company or product that you're naming, including your objectives for the name, as well as who your customers and competitors are, and how you think your offering will differ from others, as well as naming specific information, such as desired messages for the brand and your preferred name styles. You should expect your agency to develop a comprehensive list of name ideas, in the thousands, and screen a subset of their list for trademark availability. And if your schedule permits, a good agency will present work to you multiple times in order to better understand your personal name style preferences and put their final recommendations in a graphic context that will help you envision the brand name in a real-world setting. The last thing I'd like to touch on is what you can do as a client to make your experience working with a naming agency as productive and enjoyable as possible. For starters, make sure that all your key decision makers are involved in the naming process from the beginning. And that doesn't mean involve everyone in your company or your department, but the folks who will have a say in your name decision. They should be involved right out of the gate. Second, understand and appreciate that because naming is a very subjective thing, at first not everyone is going to feel equally enthusiastic about your final name selection. But in time, and with the addition of a visual identity and collateral marketing communications, everyone will warm to it. Lastly, it's important to recognize the enormous legal hurdles that your name candidates face, and that not every name presented will ultimately be available to you. Do your job as a project manager to set expectations for your team and help them appreciate the challenges you're all facing in coming up with a name for your company or product. If you're working with a good naming agency, they'll help you establish these expectations. So, to summarize, naming services aren't cheap, and they may not be for everyone. Also, a company's portfolio should be extensive and diverse, and you should admire their work. You should expect approximately 6 weeks to complete a project, and to optimize your chances for success, you should involve all key decision makers early on, accept that naming is a subjective exercise, and lastly, understand the legal challenges that you all face. I'm Mark Skoultchi with Catchword. Hope this was helpful, and thanks for checking out our video.